Good morning, good afternoon, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alec, and I'm going to be here today to help answer any of your general questions or technical questions that you have. But before we get started, I'm going to cover a couple things you need to know about the session. There's no dial-in number for attendees. All audio will be streamed through your computer speakers or headphones, so please adjust your volume there accordingly. You can submit questions for today's speakers or any technical issues you may encounter by clicking on the Q&A icon located on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here with this top arrow on the slide. Click that icon here, this Q&A icon, type in your question and click submit. If it's content related, we're going to pull a few of those during a Q&A session towards the end, so we'll get to as many of those as we can. If it's a technical question, I'll have an answer for you that should have a fix that will appear on your screen shortly after you submit. You can download a PDF of the slide deck from today's presentation right now by clicking on the handouts icon located on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here with this bottom arrow. Just click that piece of paper icon right there, and you should be able to pull down a PDF to follow along today for your notes if you like to take those. Today's webinar is being recorded. You're going to receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email, so please keep your eyes open for that. That email will come from HCM Events. Please remember to check spam as well. Sometimes these emails do get sent there. It will contain a link to the recording, a link to the PDF of the slides, and it will contain all of your HRCI and SHRM certification information for today's event, so you can pull that information from that email. And again, that will come from HCM Events. All right, we're excited for today's event. We have a couple great speakers with us. We have Kathy Crenshaw. Kathy has a master's in learning and instructional technology from Arizona State, and has 30 years of experience in talent management, organizational development, leadership, and performance management. Along with Kathy today, we have Linda Maddie. Linda has a master's in social work from Portland State University and has worked more than 12 years as a licensed clinical social worker. She worked exclusively with veterans for 10 years with concentrations in complex addictions and mental health, and was a national master trainer on veterans post-deployment reintegration issues. So like I said, it's our pleasure to have both Kathy and Linda with us. So Kathy, Linda, actually, I'll toss it to you first. Let's get started.
Great. Thank you, Alec. And thank you, everyone, for giving us the opportunity to talk with you. We are so excited about this topic. I think you're going to pick up on our passion. And just a little information about how we got here. It's been about 6 years ago, and as part of the work I was doing with veterans, one of the things I was doing was going out and training judges and law enforcement and attorneys on veterans transitioning out of the military. And I was telling Kathy about it and just how surprised I was at how little information people had about veterans, about military culture, and about some of the transitioning issues that happen. Kathy, you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so thanks, Linda. I was in an organization where I was a leader in the learning department and had a young woman working on my team who had shared with me that she was a veteran. And as I was listening to Linda talk about some of these transitional issues, it became very evident to me that I needed to learn this content as well to be a better leader and understand more the transitional issues that this young veteran was having so that I could better support her. So this is how our yin and yang with her therapy experience and work with veterans and my leadership experience. And so we've been working now, as she said, for probably more than 6 years on helping companies build veteran-informed culture. Now, we know that a lot of veterans or with any employees, engaging them is really important. And so it's very important with veterans to make a positive connection in their work environment. And it obviously leads to a higher retention rate when they feel that they are well supported. It benefits both the organization and it benefits our veterans. Now, most companies, or there are many companies out there that say we support our veterans, we're veteran friendly, we attract, recruit, and we hire our veterans. And there's a real reason for that, right? Because there's some real money that not only is it the social impact of being able to say that they're veteran and friendly, but there is a monetary reason for recruiting and hiring veterans. And so here are some of the government incentives that you'll see being offered for hiring veterans. When these started several years ago, in order to be eligible, you had to hire a veteran and be able to report that to these different government incentives. Now they're a little more restrictive, where you have to report that you have retained that veteran for a period of 12 months before you're eligible to receive this funding. Here's a couple other interesting facts or statistics that have been published. That 50%, where you'll hear often that the unemployment rate for veterans has gone down. One of the things that's still quite high is that 50% of veterans leave their first post-military job in the first 6 months. And over 65% of them actually change jobs in the first 2 years. So knowing what kind of costs go into recruiting and attracting veterans, we know that that's a costly statistic for us, especially if we're going to look into those monetary incentives for hiring veterans. A couple of other interesting statistics that I want to share with you, because we're going to touch on them, and it's really the basis of our presentation today. This was done from a study with Prudential and Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, where you'll see that some of them are obvious on what they are, but the ones that are relevant for us today is around readjusting to social life, others not culturally competent veterans, and finding support to handle health issues, concerns when looking for employment. So take a look at these, especially the bottom. 58% report concerns about cultural barriers. Managers don't understand them. They can't relate to coworkers, or that the workers or even hiring managers are intimidated by veterans. And lastly, some of the challenges in finding jobs. Again, the more obvious ones are around the military skills transfer, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But if you'll look about halfway down, employers don't understand or are insensitive. They have trouble finding comfort in non-military environments. Or the bottom two is around veterans don't think that, or employers don't think veterans have the adequate skills, or avoid hiring veterans. So these are some of the statistics that actually support some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And also supports this, that focusing on veteran issues and attracting, recruiting, and hiring really is not enough. It needs to go beyond that and has to be a part of all phases of an employee life cycle, and really clearly defined and communicated throughout your company and in your recruiting processes. So as we encourage you to build and develop a strategy for integrating veterans and looking at implementing things in each one of these areas of the employee life cycle, know the special needs and challenges of veterans that you hire and the strengths that they bring to the organization, and what are the strategies you're going to employ in each one of these areas to make sure that the veterans are better transitioned from their military culture into your civilian culture. So in order for us to be able to do that, it's really important to set the stage and understand what is going on in the military culture itself. So we're going to spend a little time on that, and then look at the 7 attributes that we've identified that veterans bring into the organization. And that sets a great foundation for us to be able to look at the gaps that may exist between their military culture and that of your civilian environment. And then take a look at some of the strategies that we, if we're an HR group, are very centrally located to be able to do something in our organizations to make that transition easier. So Linda, share with us some of those fundamentals in understanding the military veteran.
So let's just do a quick overview. I'd like to do an overview of the veteran, kind of the culture that they're transitioning out of, and then let's have a quick conversation about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury. Those are the areas where we get most of our questions. And also we're hearing from veterans that that's an area that they feel comes up the most for them as they're transitioning into employment, into the civilian world. So when we look at what is a veteran, I just want to get us all on the same page for what that definition is. And a veteran is a person who has served in the armed forces. And when we talk about the armed forces, we're talking about 5 branches of the military. The Army is the oldest branch and the largest. The Navy is the second oldest. The Marines is actually part of the Navy, and it's the smallest branch of the military, but I don't know my Marines yet. So the Coast Guard is the part of the military that obviously protects our shorelines. And then the Air Force is the newest member of the military branches. So all of the military branches have an active duty component and a reserve component. So active duty that is your full-time job. You are fully in the military. Reserve is that you're not full-time in the military, but you are part of the military as a reserve force, and you work 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. And all of this comes under the federal government. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Also, we have as part of our military our National Guard. And National Guard normally comes under the authority of the state. And when we think of National Guard, we think of, how we use them when there's emergencies within our state. I mean, I live on the West Coast. So, when there's big forest fires, the National Guard a lot of times will get deployed to help with those. The National Guard was a big part of Katrina. So that's how we picture the National Guard being used. However, when there's an emergency like what happened in 9/11, they can come under the authority of the federal government, and then they become part of our military. And since 9/11, they have been deployed as part of the efforts on the fight against terrorism. So it's important to know how your veterans have served and how they're coming into your workforce. Just because it'll give you an idea of what their experience is like and also kind of some of the supports that they may have. So here's a quick little chart we put together comparing active duty with Guard and Reserve. And with active duty, again, that is your full-time job. That is your family's full-time experience. You have housing, you have benefits. You also have support by being connected to a military base, military support. When you have a military base, the community around the military base is very much aware of a military presence, and a lot of supports are built into that. And when you look at a Guard and Reserve member, they're more civilian soldiers. And so their connection with those military benefits, those military supports, and for them and for their families are going to be reduced. And also that access to that support from a military base or from the community surrounding it. There are, some states have a heavy active duty military presence, so they're going to have a lot of bases, but then some states have very limited. Oregon, I'm very familiar with, is one of 6 states in the country that doesn't have an active duty military base. So a service member that's been in the National Guard, been deployed under active duty to work in the military setting is going to have a different experience than somebody, say, in Washington State who is coming from an active duty military site. So again, just language to raise awareness for you. So when we talk about how our military looks now, we need to be aware that we are at war. And this is being fought under the umbrella of global war on terrorism. We've never been at war this long. It's earned the nickname of the long war. It's longer than World War I, World War II put together. As graduation from high school is coming up, I had an awareness the other day that 17-year-olds that will be graduating from high school in June have never lived in a country that's been at peace. And that's not something that's on most of our radar. So I think it's important for us to be aware of it. Global war on terrorism started in 2001 with Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom, OEF, and then in 2003 with Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom, OIF. And this conflict has some different characteristics than maybe what we've seen in the past. One of them is the battle zone. Traditionally when we think of conflict, we think of there being a front line where the conflict occurs. In this conflict, our military is engaged in communities. They're engaged in urban settings. They're engaged in villages. They're engaged in conflict where people live and where they work and go to school and where they worship. And so that's going to be a different experience than what we've seen before. And we see that high stress that can come out of that cumulative stress from being on alert, being in these environments. Weapons, they're much more advanced. And the one weapon that has been discussed a lot in these conflicts are the explosive devices, the IEDs, improvised explosive devices. They are powerful and cause a lot of collateral damages. And so we see a lot more use of them. Many times when we think of veteran, we automatically get a picture of a male, but females are very much a presence in our modern day military. When we think about females in our military in Vietnam, we had approximately 11,000 women serve in country during that conflict. And we've had over 250,000 women serve in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's significant. And all areas have been opened up so women can now serve in any capacity. And so that's a really major thing for us to be aware of as we have veterans entering into our workforce. And then the number of deployments. We've never seen it like this before. When we think of prior conflicts, Vietnam was pretty much one tour of duty. That's not to say that people didn't go back for 2, maybe 3 tours, but it was not the normal. We had a different military then. We had a draft military. We now have a volunteer military. We have the National Guard as part of our military for this conflict. And it is not uncommon to see a service member deployed 2, 3, or more times. 2 veterans I specifically think about with multiple deployments. One was deployed 7 times and 9 times. And that's significant. And, here's the deal. Multiple deployments does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing. The experiences you gain, there's so many positives to it. But what we do know about multiple deployments is that the more times you're deployed, the more exposure you have to both physical and mental health injuries. And again, it's going to be a long time before we know what the overall outcome is of this because we've never seen it like this before. So I'd like to look a little bit have a conversation about the physical and the mental impacts that can be experienced when someone is deployed. Again, this is a lot of the questions we get in some of the conversations that come up when we talk with veterans that they have with their employers. So let's just do some demystifying. And for general definition, trauma, the simplified definition is trauma is anything that overwhelms one's ability to cope. And you can potentially have an impact from trauma exposure by experiencing a traumatic event directly where your life is at risk for death or severe injury, or you can witness someone experiencing death or severe injury, or there's tertiary trauma where we are aware of a situation where someone could experience severe death or severe injury or death. And we see that with pilots and we see that with drone operators. So very much a way of experiencing trauma. So when we look at PTSD, so we have a working definition for trauma right now. So when we look at PTSD, what I'd like to do is look at a polling question. And I think Alec is going to load that for us, and so we can have a conversation about that. So look at the question and make a selection there, and then let's kind of look at that. Take just a minute and pick one of those options.
All right, we have some results coming in, so it'll just take a minute here.
So we're looking at some of the options. Do all veterans suffer from PTSD? Only veterans who served in combat can be diagnosed with PTSD. PTSD is a diagnosable mental health condition. All of the above are true. So what do you think?
You should be able to see the results now.
I don't see them, Alex.
I see them.
Do you?
I'll go ahead and, yeah, let me tell you about them right now. Basically, all veterans suffer from some degree. We had 5%. 0 said only those who served in combat. PTSD is a diagnosable mental health condition, 50%, and all of the above are true, 45%. Linda, the answer is?
The answer is C. PTSD is a diagnosable mental health condition. Thanks, Kathy. So, and I think that's important. PTSD is diagnosable. There is set criteria that we can look at to say whether or not someone does have PTSD. It is treatable. So there is treatment that can be given to someone that has that diagnosis, and it's recoverable. You can live a very fine quality of life with PTSD. So that's an important thing to be aware of. So let's look at, thank everybody for doing that presentation, or for doing that polling. I appreciate that. So let's look at PTSD symptoms. Like I said, there's set criteria, and they come into 3 areas. There's physical reactions, there's emotional reactions, and there's behavioral. And so when you look at these, you can kind of see how some of these could have an impact on somebody in the workforce. You know, insomnia is a big one. If somebody is sleep deprived, it's definitely going to have an impact on their ability to perform in a work environment. Anxiety, that hypervigilance, and we'll kind of look at some of these and how they look in the workforce. The one thing I really want to point out here is suicide is very much a symptom of PTSD, and there are many resources to help with suicide, getting people the care and the support that they need. One specific to veterans is the Suicide Veterans Prevention Line, and that's 1-800-273-TALK, and you press 1 and you're specifically connected to a veteran resource. This is a line that's available to veterans, to their family members, to their friends, and to their employers. So this is definitely something I really would like to see everybody take a note of. And again, there's a lot of other resources, some specific to local areas and to states. Okay, so when we look at, and again, this is really quick, but I just want to make sure I get information out to you. When we look at the impact of PTSD, how it can impact you in your daily life and in your work life, you can see a lot of times we have veterans that will avoid large groups and large crowds, and that's because of feeling uncomfortable and maybe not having that feeling of safety. But look at how that looks in your work life. If you have a veteran who has their back to a door or to the opening of their cubicle, they may have a difficult time concentrating. They may not feel really comfortable. And so, you know, and they may not even be aware of that's what's happening. So again, by creating this veteran-informed environment, you can see how some of these work-life challenges, we can get in front of them and we can help mitigate them before they become a problem that shows up in the workplace. So the next one that I want to just touch on again is on traumatic brain injury. And we hear a lot about that with this population. And, you know, let's just demystify that. You know, this has been called the signature wound of the conflict. And traumatic brain injury, when you think about your brain, so it's this 3-pound organ. It sits inside your skull casing. It's nicely protected in this gelatin-type fluid. And when it's exposed to a blast, it's going to kind of act like Jell-O. It's going to hit against that skull casing. And one blast, one force is going to be multiple hits on that skull casing. And that causes bruising and bleeding in the brain. So what's different about traumatic brain injury, TBI, in a military setting as opposed to professional sports or high school sports is it's the number of times that someone can be exposed potentially to a traumatic brain injury. So you may be exposed to an explosion, and instead of taking 2 to 3 weeks off after that, you know, you would go ahead and go back to your base, and then you may be back at work the next day. And so you may have multiple exposures to blasts within a deployment period. And again, this is new information for us. So long-term impacts, still we're out there looking at them. When you look at the impact of traumatic brain injury and PTSD together, you will see there's an overlap of some of these symptoms. And again, this is treatable, diagnosable and treatable. But the one thing I think is really important that I'd like for you to be aware of as an employer is hearing loss. 60% of our veterans that are exposed to blast have significant hearing loss. And you don't expect a 20-year-old to have a hard time hearing you. So again, as we really strive to create a veteran-informed culture, that's something we can get ahead of. And maybe we can make some mitigating adjustments that will support that veteran and make this transition an easier thing for them. So Kathy, you want to talk about that actual transitioning into civilian life?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. So we are actively recruiting and hiring veterans because of the skills and that their experience in the military brings, though we have some difficulty translating and seeing what those are. If you have read any articles about veterans transitioning, you see various skills or attributes that they bring to the workplace. I want you to take a minute, use the Q&A portion of your control panel on the right-hand side. Type in a couple of responses into that Q&A space on what you feel are the qualities or the attributes or characteristics that are inviting and attractive for you to hire veterans into your workspace. Take a minute and type some of those in, if you will. I'll give you about 20 seconds into the Q&A section. Terrific. We've got some good responses. Thank you. Terrific. Some of them are unique that I see in here, and some of them are very similar. All right, let's take a look at them. Thank you for the responses, everybody. Those are great additions. So what we're seeing here that's popping up, I see loyal leadership or natural leaders, critical thinking. We saw their organization skills. Thank you, Rosalie, for that one. Sense of community, patriotic, they're responsible, team mentality, they're quick learners. Discipline, Joey, thank you for that one. Trust in leadership. And so one of the things that we've identified, and you see what I did there? See what I did? We've actually been able to categorize these attributes that you shared with us here into 7 primary categories of veterans. And we've learned this through focus groups and our workshops that we could do this, this could go on for hundreds of qualities and characteristics for veterans. But we've been able to categorize them into these 7 buckets or attributes: embracing diversity, integrity, perseverance, teamwork, planning and organizing, leadership, and problem solving. And and like I said, as you read articles, you'll see these same terminologies coming up. So one of the things that we've done is came up with a basic definition that we could all level set around what these attributes mean and how they're defined. And so one of the things that I'd like to share with you is that you can print the presentation out, as Alec had mentioned, but we also have these definitions, as you see here, with some of the characteristics that you came up in a quick reference guide on our website. And at the end of this presentation, I'll share with you how you can download this quick reference guide and then a couple of others that we also want to share with you. So one of the ones that I want to take a look at, just for purposes of illustration, this next kind of thought model, is teamwork. So look at the definition of teamwork: cooperative or coordinated effort by a group of people acting together in the interest of a common cause. And some of those characteristics that you shared earlier on in your question and answer window was around accountability and reliability, team mentality, protecting others. So I want you to consider that definition as we move forward with this next exercise. and this exercise is kind of identifying transitional gaps. So we're going to look at teamwork. Based on what Linda shared with you and perhaps your own experience in the military or with veterans on your teams, is that teamwork in the military may look like this. The focus can be is on the team as a whole versus individual accomplishments. A very organized team structure with a specific goal or mission that's clearly identified. There are some specific roles that are defined. Sometimes there's a dedicated leader. Timelines are typically not negotiable, and everyone is responsible for the success or failure of a mission. And most of the time, we deal with intact teams. You know, we have the same people on the team, at least for a period, a significant period of time. So again, tell me what that looks like in your civilian workplace culture, whether you're on a higher ed campus or a technical culture. I want to listen, if you can type again in the question and answer section of your control panel, what does teamwork look like in your organization? I'm going to give you 20 seconds. Type in there, what does teamwork look like in your organization? Okay. Awesome. I see some wonderful responses that you're sharing. Thank you, Marissa, Paul, Joey, Julianne. So let's take a look at that, what that looks like. Oops, there we go. Some of you, one of the words that I saw the most often was collaboration, sharing of ideas. Sometimes self-directed were some of the words you use. So take a look at what we've got here. Informal structure, potentially, not always a formal leader. The hierarchy is really not important. Collaborative process. Sometimes team members change frequently, maybe even in the middle of a project, right? Depending on the goal or objective. And we have different types of teams, not necessarily the intact team that reports to a single manager or leader. Sometimes we have work group or cross-functional teams or project teams that we have to work in. So now you can begin to see what type of differences you have between these two very unique cultures. One of the things that's interesting about culture is that companies have a unique culture, right? If you look at companies like IBM versus one maybe like Southwest Airlines or GoDaddy or Zappos, you see different types of cultures that can almost be defined by a few descriptive words. One unique thing that even in those cultures, company cultures, you have microcultures. You might have a branch culture or a department or a team culture that that a veteran has to be aware of and be able to navigate. So as you look at those two differences, what are potential transitional issues that might happen? And so here are a few of them that we've identified, but I bet you may be able to relate to some of these on your own. Take a look at sense of loss from no longer, these are transitional issues on the veteran, no longer being able to be connected to a strong team. Remember, this was one of those statistics from earlier on in the presentation. Many of these gaps have been validated by some of the data that you saw earlier. Individual versus team focus. So some of the feelings that they have, isolation, they feel anonymous or alienated, manifest themselves in certain behaviors sometimes, where they're frustrated or they become apathetic and kind of check out. Uncertainty with, if you see the third bullet, uncertainty with who's in charge can be really frustrating. They may not understand the competition in a team, or the individual efforts being celebrated. Some of the feelings that there is a lack of organization and team cohesiveness. If we don't necessarily meet those deadlines, they don't feel that those are respected, and it becomes to be a trust issue. And lastly, in the absence of a defined leader, sometimes the veteran may take charge. And this is some of the feedback that we've gotten in our workshops from HR business partners around having to coach veterans or their leaders around them feeling inflexible or assertive or aggressive. So becoming aware of what those gaps are is the first step, right? Kind of figuring out what that root cause is. But awareness doesn't equal action, okay? And if awareness without action is really wasted. It's wasteful. And so we encourage people to help create this veteran-informed culture, but then the next step is really to be involved. And leaders and HR needs to employ various strategies at different levels. It can be very, very simple to help close the gap in each transition. Pictured here is we actually have a workbook for leaders that gives them some diagnostic tools on how to work through what some of those gaps may be. And the first step is the exercise that we just did together on teamwork. I encourage you to do that exercise in your own organizations for each of those 7 attributes that we shared with you, to identify what those potential gaps are. Then once you know, you can start to identify what are some of those things we need to do, not just with the veteran. We don't have to fix them, right? We need to, it's a faceted approach. We need to address this from the leaders in our organization. We need to address it in the teams that our veterans are on. We need to help provide our veterans with the support that they need to also be successful. So knowing that, there are many things. We're centrally positioned in HR to do a lot of the fundamental things to better support transition veterans. And so what I'd like to do is provide you with what some of those strategies are that you can do in each one of these phases, as we've identified the life cycle of an employee. Yours may look a little different. Some of these you may have already begun to use in your own company. And so I think that is really important here. So let's take a look at these. Which of these have you adopted, and which ones are low-hanging fruit that would be easy for you to do? Now, I want to also mention really quick as you look at this, especially, again, you can download the presentation, but there's another quick reference guide on our website that has all of these that you'll see on one page. So it's a one-page quick reference guide that lists all of these tips or strategies for you in each one of these phases. So we have, reviewing your website, creating a veteran-friendly job searching or career opportunity portal, revising your job descriptions to include skill translation, and really helping to train managers and recruiters on how to interview veterans and pull from them. They're quite proud how to pull from them what those skills are and try to better translate those into what you need for them to perform on the job. And then lastly, that last bullet, identify and utilize those hiring incentives. I saw a question earlier that said, is this available, were those incentives available for new veterans or existing veterans? And the answer is, check out the Department of Labor website for these incentives, and they all have different criteria for eligibility around veterans. And again, that being able to retain them is a part of that. So there's also in there one for wounded warriors as well. So make sure you check out that website to find out. And we have a resource page for you that's also one of those resources for you for that. Let's look at the next one real quick, onboarding and assimilating. I'm always amazed that in the last 3 companies that I worked in that were large companies, one of my responsibilities was creating an onboarding program. One company was 50 years old. Another one was about 32 years old. And so the fact that just because a company's been around a long time, they don't always have a very formal and effective onboarding program. And with veterans, it's really important. I saw a comment come through here that, you know, as a vet, it's important to know that roles are well defined. So make sure that you're sharing those org charts and what the leadership philosophy is for communication. What are the goals and the performance process and tools? Remember, they're used to a pretty regimented and structured process when it comes to those types of things. Utilize buddy programs and veteran mentors or support programs. Make sure, though, that you include people like veteran spouses and other people in the company. So don't make it exclusively for veterans to be a part of that group. Everyone will want to be a part of that support group. So, you know, it's important that we don't single out this very emerging demographic. We don't want to be discriminatory, but inclusive. Formally educate administrative items like benefits, timekeeping, payroll. Sometimes they've never ever filled out a timesheet or had to select healthcare benefits or 401k. So make sure that that information is out there, and they might not necessarily feel like they can ask. Encourage team building and assimilation exercises. Remember, this is one of those elements from the data that we saw earlier, that they don't feel like they're well understood or that they fit in. And so assimilation exercises really help in your onboarding process with the leader and the team. Be informed of resources. We have a 2-page guide on the website that we'll share with you if you want it after the session, that gives you resources for you within an HR role as a leader, and ones that you can share with veterans as well. Training and development. I spent a lot of years in training and development, training leadership, but I've never really considered looking at talking about these transitional issues. Good leaders are good leaders, and if they feel that something is going wrong, a lot of times they're going to feel it in their gut, but they're going to need some help on handling that. And so we're well positioned to be able to train them on what those are and provide strategies for them to implement and bridge the gap. It can be something little. It can be a self-reflection exercise for a manager. It can be a team exercise, or it can be one that a manager works with the veteran on. Create personal and professional development plans. That's very important to them. That's one of the top 3 reasons a veteran leaves a job, is because they don't feel that there's opportunity for them or that their skills are being well used. Provide job, skill, and functional training. I think that one is pretty obvious. And then support leaders with performance issues. I want you to keep that in mind as we move through this, because sometimes it's not so obvious what the issue is, or what the root cause of that issue is. Next, career growth. So I touched on that a little bit. Make sure you provide career paths or ladders. They're used to structured, here's how I advance, here's how I get promoted, I take these tests, I have this experience, I get to move on. Communicate clearly with them what those are and what the process is for advancement. Now, also, in my years working with companies on there's these career growth plans, is that some companies don't have them. And so if your company doesn't have them, be honest about that. Be transparent and say, we don't have this, we can do this. So if there is no advancement programs, communicate it. Be, in the interest of full disclosure, be transparent in that and let them know what you see opportunities are for them. And lastly, rewards and recognition. Rewards are something that is celebrated, and recognition in the military. They wear it on their uniforms. You see it on their sleeves, the patches, the stripes, the ribbons, is very ceremonious and obvious. And so take advantage of those and communicate them to your veterans. What are they? Are they service awards, performance recognition? Let them know what the criteria is. And veterans are very aware when things like the performance recognition awards are not invested in equally. And so spend some time on how you implement those programs. And then explain compensation bands. It's very confusing to look at total rewards or bonus structures, compensation bands or levels. So spend some time to consider communicating that as well to the veteran. One of the interesting studies that are out there is that there are 80% of companies lack these special programs around training or onboarding for veterans. That's significant. 70% report no special assistance during onboarding or training. And so one of the things that this really points to is that where there's a big effort on recruiting and hiring veterans, there's not an equal effort for making sure that we're paying attention to the things that engage and ultimately retain veterans. One of the things I would like to say is don't wait to implement any of those ideas. There's some low-hanging fruit that you can do, and don't wait for your strategy to be perfect. Start now. Become involved. You have a level of awareness now as a result of this. So, start today. Linda, I think, has a great story I want her to share that sort of summarizes the points that we've made so far. Linda?
Thanks, Kathy. Kathy, we did this. This is so quick for us. I think we may have forgotten to mention that we're cousins, and our grandmother was an amazing storyteller, and so we learned from a really young age how valuable stories can be and the impact they can have. And so I was telling Kathy this story, and we wanted to share it with you. It's been a couple of months ago now, and I was in the lunchroom, and one of my coworkers who's a veteran came and sat with me, and he started talking to me about his transition out of the military. And when he was in the military, he was firearms expert, and so that was what he did. And as he left the military, he got a job offer at a shooting range. And he was telling me, oh my gosh, this is perfect. It's a job made in heaven. And he was really excited about it. And they were so excited to have him join them and bring the skills that he brought and his expertise. And so they basically told him, they said, this is yours, and go ahead and run it like you did in the military. And we trust your skills here and your expertise. And a couple times his boss would peek in during the first 30 days. And after he'd been there about 30 days, he got called into his boss's office, and his boss was there, and his boss's boss was there. And they're like, so how's it going? And he was like, it is going amazing. And he was talking about some of the processes that he had implemented and just how excited he was about the job and how much he liked it. And he said, but we have a real problem with our customers. He said, they don't listen. They don't follow direction. They don't practice like they're supposed to. They're unsafe. They're dangerous. And he just went into this list of the customers. And what he found out later, they shared with him, is that they were getting a lot of complaints. And so they had called him in, and in the back of their minds, they were thinking they were going to have to let him go. And because he came in and was so enthusiastic about the job, and as he talked about the customers, they realized that they had told him to run it like he did in the military, and he did. And he did not realize the culture difference. It just wasn't on his radar. And so they were able to make an adjustment, bring him up to speed. We're going to have to work with customers a little differently. They basically write our paychecks and kind of make some adjustments with him. And he did. He made those adjustments. They were able to support him through that. And he ended up staying with the company for 10 years. And he said it was a really great job. And so that is the type of experience that we hear from veterans. And so I just wanted to share that story for you. You really have a chance here to make a difference. And the difference is going to be for you and for your company and for the veterans that work with you. Thank you. Kathy?
Yep, thanks, Linda. And so, you know, we're well positioned as leaders of veterans or within HR, regardless of what capacity that we function in HR, to really support veterans transitioning out of the military. We know that their past military experience brings strong skills and strengths and qualities that we want in our company and in our communities, but they really do face challenges upon reentry into the civilian world. And those challenges kind of manifest themselves in certain behaviors from gaps that exist as a result of those two different paradigms. As I said, our cultures, we might have a company culture, but the one that they're going into has some nuances in itself. So our role is really to support those transitioning veterans and provide strategies that help them bridge those gaps. So moving forward, you know, we are really in a time in our history to be able to support them like never before and really honor them who have served, you know, who have served us. It's not enough to buy a soldier's coffee. You know, that's a nice gesture, but gesture doesn't always mean action, all right? We have to be involved. It has to be part of our culture's fabric. So we have some additional resources on our website. Those three that I mentioned, the attributes list, the resources list, and then the one page around the employee life cycle and some of those things. So if you go to our website, it lists the steps here. And if you use the coupon code workforce, it'll allow you to download them for free. So I thank you again for letting us participate. Alec, I'm going to turn it over for you. And we do have some time for questions if anybody has some questions for us.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Kathy and Linda. We do have a little bit of time for questions, so if you have a question, just click on the Q&A icon, type in your question, and click submit. Again, I just want to remind you, I had a few come in about this being recorded. This webinar was recorded. You're going to receive a link to that recording and follow-up email, so please keep your eyes open for that. This first question here comes from Kenneth. I'm going to go to you with this one first, Kathy. Kenneth was just wondering, are the incentives and tax credits that you mentioned earlier only for recent veterans or all veterans that an employer hires?
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. Because these incentives change frequently, I really encourage you to visit the Department of Labor website and look at these, and it'll talk to you about the eligibility of veterans. Most of them are, you know, eligible for veterans are any veterans, not just brand new transitioning veterans. There are some additional incentives for those that have health-related issues from their service. So make sure that you look at the Department of Labor site.
All right, perfect. This next one comes from Brandon. As a veteran who recently transitioned into the corporate world, what is your advice on the best first step I can take to help my company build a strategy for targeted veteran recruiting? I'm thinking we need to start with the careers page. We don't have anything publicly facing to invite veterans in.
Yep, that's a great start. So first of all, thank you for your service. And that's a great, and like I said earlier on, it's really a faceted approach. Don't try to boil the ocean, Brandon. Really try to identify what are those things that you can implement pretty easily, quickly, inexpensively to begin to move that needle. But build an overall strategy. Where do you want to be in a year, 2 years, and 3 years? And then identify what some of those little things are. And some of them are around your website. A lot of them is with your recruiters themselves and translating those job descriptions and the skills themselves in the positions that you have. And work with your hiring managers to be better at interviewing veterans, to pull from them those behaviors and those skills that they learned in the military as a result of their experience, but that translate nicely into your environment. You know, some of the comments we saw, if it's a government entity or one that works with a lot of military vendors, the culture may be very similar. And so the transition might not be as big or as difficult. Like those gaps might not be as big. But with the other ones, those transition issues tend to be a little bit larger. So Brandon, my advice to you is figure out what you want to look like, to be veteran informed and involved in a year. And then what are some of those little things that you can do, and then do them. Don't wait until you have all your ducks in a row. Start working, make a difference.
All right, perfect. We have another one in here from Rosalie. Rosalie's question is, besides the Department of Labor, what is a good opportunity to connect with and source veterans?
There are so many different websites out there now for sourcing veterans, and they change all the time. I think we have a few of them on the resource that we currently have on our website around websites, but most of the time they want you to stick with very popular websites or recruiting programs around that you use all the time. So the web crawlers that are out there, Indeed.com, any of those popular sites, the other ones, Glassdoor, are good for recruiting veterans. Make note that a lot of times not all veteran applicants will self-disclose that they're a veteran. Now, it may be pretty obvious by looking at their website, but if you're looking from a screening standpoint, you need to really look beyond that self-disclosure if they're a veteran.
All right, great. We have time for at least one more. The question comes from Paula, and Paula is wondering, do you notice if the transition is any different for male or female veterans?
Linda, you want to take that one, and then I have a thought on it as well.
Sure. No, I don't. I mean, the transition issues are pretty similar. I think we see it more because there's a larger presence of male veterans coming out of the military, but the transition issues are pretty much the same. I think we just don't recognize them for females because they're just not on our radar as being veterans. So I have not seen any significant differences. Kathy, what were you thinking?
I was thinking that as well, and sometimes female veterans don't always, again, self-disclose. And like the veteran on my team, for example, she worked for me for a year before I knew she was a veteran in Iraq, and she was also a police officer in the military, in the Air Force. One of the things I wanted to say about female and male that in general is that I have colleagues who, both the husband and the wife, were career military. They both retired with 21, 22 years respectively in the Air Force. The female had no transitional issues. She transitioned beautifully. They both had deployments, very similar background. Her husband really struggled with the transition. It took him a lot longer to get a job. He left his first job, like I said, within probably the first 4 months, and he was in a job. And so what it boiled down to in that particular was really their personality types and how well they were to be able to adapt to the new environment. So there are those other issues that come into play that it's really hard. You can't say that one is any different than the other.
All right. That's going to be all the time we have. But thank you again, Kathy and Linda, for that. And thank you to everybody in attendance today. I also want to thank the sponsors of this Spotlight webinar at Cornerstone OnDemand. If you enjoyed today's webinar, please take the time to fill out a quick post-event survey, which is going to appear right as this webinar ends. Your feedback is obviously very important to us here at Workforce Magazine. So thanks again to both Kathy and Linda and everybody on the line. We'll see everybody back here for our next Workforce webinar, which will take place a week from today on April 25th, and that is titled The Datification of Talent Management, How People Analytics Leads to Strategic Excellence. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.